So one of the main things I've been trying to do in the prior videos is answer some of the frequently asked questions people have about experiential spirituality. Not what they teach you in church, but what spirituality actually is like, bumping into genuine spirits. And to a great extent, the path of shamanism. 40 years of study have led me to finally understand a lot of things. And there's a lot of stuff I don't understand, but I've understood a lot of things, untied a lot of knots, where people tell you things that are categorically not true and actually impede your path towards spirituality if you choose to follow one. So I've been trying to answer questions and unwind these knots. And that's what I want to kind of continue doing. The most common question, of course, anybody has when they find out you do shamanic stuff is, what's a shaman? And to some extent they'll ask about frauds, or they'll talk about frauds. Well, I've answered that. There's video out there already. I've talked about the different manifestations of shamanism in the Western culture, and I've talked about how you tell a real shaman from a fraud shaman, and the whole phenomena of frauds, and the whole phenomena of the plastic cosplay shamans. So you can go back and watch those if you have those questions in mind. What I want to do now is that the next most commonly asked question, besides all those, takes a lot of explanation to truly answer in the detail that it deserves, in a way that gets around all the lies and all the misperceptions and all the fantasy, because from the Western point of view, we are loaded with fantasy. We are loaded with stuff from fantasy books. Told you that the 10 types of shamans you encounter in the West, the first most common thing is a fictitious concept of spirituality and shamanism. That's not actually a person. It is these stories that are put out to us that are complete garbage and have no validity whatsoever. A lot of them are passed off as absolutely true, and they're total garbage. So you need to kind of get over that. Especially if you want to answer the next question, which is, of course, how do I pursue this end? I personally am walking away from Judeo-Christianity, or I've been a Wiccan, or I've been an atheist, or I've been an agnostic, and now I'm very interested in a nature-centric spirituality, and I want to find out more about shamanism. How do I get started? That's a very, very complicated question if you want to take it seriously, and it's really... you have to address certain different things. The first thing you have to address is, what do you mean by that? And are you serious? If you were to come to me and you wanted to have discussions and get down that path, work with me to kind of get your head right, the first thing I'd want to ascertain is, what do you really want? What do you want? Do you want to be a cosplay shaman? To just look at nature as wallpaper? Do you know anything about animals? Do you go out into the woods? I mean, not on trails, I mean into the woods. Do you hunt? Do you trap? Do you fish? Do you know how to, what tree is what? Do you know how to make a shelter? Do you know how to make a fire without matches or without a lighter? Do you know how to harvest clean water, drinking water for yourself in the woods? Do you know the different plants, medicinal plants, edible plants? Do you know anything about nature? Or are you just thinking that nature's kind of pretty and you kind of have this nice feeling about nature and you want to dress up and look like a nature child? And that's about as much of nature as you know. You think kitties are warm and horsies are cute, and that's about as much as you know, and it's about as much as you care. If you are going to look to nature, you need to look nature dead in the eyes. Nature is not nice. Nature gives us everything we need to survive. But nature also takes everything we have. There is definitely a conversation that goes on. It is not a warfare. In the West chooses to see nature as evil, inherently evil, and sees a warfare that man must conquer nature. I don't agree with that. But I also know that nature is nature. And it is indifferent. It does you no favors. You have to do yourself your favors. You do yourself the most favors by knowing nature and working with it. Nature is not evil. It is not cruel. It is not abusive. It is not manipulative. But it's not necessarily going to be super kind to you either. And so that view of nature is probably profoundly uncomfortable, especially if you want a sweetness and light little version, the new age, poofy, hippie version of nature. That's not what the ancestors had. That is not what any traditional culture ever had. That is not what people who live with nature have. We do not do Bambi. Those people, the traditionals, and those of us who have tried to be with nature far more than is reasonable in the West, we understand that, nature gives you everything you need and it will take your life like that. It is a serious thing, and it demands a certain amount of seriousness. Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, it's powerful. Yes, it's wild. Yes, it is amazing. And yes, it will snuff you out in an instant. So if you want to be cosplay, or you want to be a fraud, you want to just make it up, you want to talk about pretty platitudes about nature, you want to think all the animals are fuzzy little cuddlies, that they're just misunderstood and all this sort of stuff, this is not, the real thing is not a path for you. Real magic's not a thing for you. Real spirituality is not a thing for you. The spirits are extensions of nature. They are nature. And so as nature is, so are the spirits. Which means quite a lot of the spirits you run into, the nature spirits, are not cute, they're not fun, they're not cuddly, they're not necessarily friendly unless you have a reason to be a friend. They can be very accommodating, very compassionate, very giving. They can also snuff you out in a minute. Just like nature. Just as you can befriend a wild animal and have a very close companionship with a genuinely wild creature, so too can that wild creature turn on you and eviscerate you. If you do something foolish, or sometimes even if you don't do anything foolish. That's the nature of what we're talking about. It's a very serious thing. So do you really even want to go down this path? That's the first thing. You want to be a cosplay shaman? Well, I can't endorse anyone being a cosplay shaman because that's a waste. It's a waste of your life and it's a waste of everybody else's time. This is about the actual natural world. Traditional people meet the natural world on its own terms. Not walking trails and stuff like that. So that would be the first thing I'd want to know. Do you really want to know nature? Could you go out and do a primitive camp? Could you make your own shelter? Could you be comfortable sleeping under a blanket under a tree? Can you light a fire? Do you know when not to light a fire? When you light a fire, how big do you make the fire? Do you realize that there's times you don't even need a fire? Do you know what those are? Do you know when to get in out of the rain? When the rain's coming? When the snow's coming? Can you talk to the wind? You know, hear what the weather is, because you can hear the quality of the wind, how it moves through the trees, how it blows, the exact specific type of gust of wind that tells you there's snow, or there's rain, or the rain's over. And if you don't know these things, you're working at a serious disadvantage. How to begin, you might want to get closer with nature. And I mean in a serious way. In a face-to-face, hand-to-hand way. Which is not popular here in the West, but, at least, farming, that's not very true natural, but at least you're interacting with animals. At least you are getting, if you keep chickens, you don't even have to kill the chickens. You just realize that, hey, my food is coming from, I have this relationship with these beings, and I give them something, and they give me something, and we depend on each other. I protect them, I defend them, and they feed me, and there's this relationship there, or a goat, or whatever. And yeah, I lived on a farm for a while. I did that. Kept chickens, kept ducks, kept goats, that sort of stuff. Gardening. Again, not nature, but again, you're in this interaction with non-human entities, with plants, figuring out what they need, figuring out how to grow them, paying attention to the subtle details. When do you plant? When do you weed? When do you feed the plants? When do you harvest? That sort of thing. Getting into those cycles of nature is very important. Very important. And I know there's a lot of you who live in places where you're not allowed to garden and you're not allowed to farm and you certainly don't have any access to nature and you still really want to go down this path. Well, it's not required, but it does start to get your mind in the right spot. If you are alienated from nature, you're going to have a bit of a harder time. So how can you proceed, though? If you want to go down this path, how do you do it? Well, there's really 3 ways that you can approach pursuing this path. If we look at the traditions all over the world of spirit people, by whatever name, be it shaman or medicine men or whatever, there's a great deal of variation. However, especially for those on the shamanic path, the most popular way, the most notable way, is that the spirits chose you. And that is the probably best way for someone to begin. Because, as I've defined shamanism as a person who works with the spirits, who has been chosen by the spirits, and who interacts with them through altered states of consciousness, up to and including actually going into the spirit world, crossing the veil between worlds, going into another world by a number of different means. That implies that the spirits chose you. And that's really the key to all this. That is what makes somebody on a shamanic path or not. So what does that look like? Well, it varies by person. For some of us, we died. I died. I've known other people who, that's how they got started. They got hit by a car, had a household accident, they got poisoned, they drowned. Something went wrong. They didn't stay dead. Sometimes the spirits saved them, sometimes the humans saved them. Sometimes they just came very close to death but didn't quite die. Sometimes people get sick. They have these shamanic crises, these shamanic illnesses. And it's become very popular amongst the cosplays to attribute any and every illness to shamanic crisis, which is not true. Just because you have diabetes, because you have cancer, just because you have heart disease, fatty liver disease, 1,000 diseases, just because you have cerebral palsy or any number of other things that some people, even if you're schizophrenic, just because you're schizophrenic does not mean it's a shamanic calling. Again, everyone wants to everybody thusly is a shaman. Everyone who can hit a drum is a shaman. Everyone who acts is a shaman. Everyone who wears a mask is a shaman. Everyone is whatever. That's garbage. Because the spirits aren't there. So, Yes, there's things like schizophrenia, and yes, there are serious illnesses like diabetes and so on that can be turned into a shamanic crisis. But that doesn't mean it is true for everybody. What typifies a shamanic crisis is that at some point in time, the spirits actually show up and they talk to you and they tell you, we're interested in you, we'll be working with you, we'll be teaching you, we'll be back. Do this. We want to see you do this, and if you do, there will be assistance or whatever. Now, that might take place in a coma. That might take place in an out-of-body experience. That might take place in a near-death experience. That may just bloody happen to you. You're in your bed or whatever, and you wake up, and there's a spirit, which is what happened to me. You feel called awake. Something calls your name. You wake up, there's a spirit standing right in front of you. Very freaky. Not a shadow, not a vapor, not a mist. The actual thing. That is the primary way that you get on this path. Now, obviously, no human can control that. I cannot do that for anybody. I cannot reproduce it intentionally for myself. These things happen or they don't happen. The second most common way is that a human, somebody who has some experience, sees something in you that intrigues them, that makes them think that you might be on this path already anyway. Oftentimes the spirits will talk to them and say, you're supposed to help that person. Now, this is ripped off by frauds right, left, and center. So just because some human comes up to you and says, you're supposed to be a shaman, come with me. No, the actual thing is they'll tend to stand back, they'll tend to watch, they might have conversations over a period of time, oftentimes months or even years. They will build up this relationship and see if you let you come to them and see if you want to come closer and closer and closer. Very rarely will a genuine article try to get you, say, you got to come to this. You got to come to our drumming circle because you might be a shaman. Oh, you're a shaman. I can tell you're a shaman. The glint in your eye tells me. No. Most of the time it's a thing about building trust. Again, are you serious or are you not serious? Are you going to follow this path or are you going to dabble in it and turn aside? The real deal wants to know these things. They're not going to invest a lot of time. There's a lot of investment of time and energy. It's like an exorcism. There's an investment of life force in helping somebody in this way. Stuff you don't get back. Stuff that kills you a little. So shamans are not necessarily, or shamanic practitioners in my case, are not necessarily just like, come on in, everybody, you're all shamans. That's I've said. That's a telltale sign that somebody's a fraud. It's a very serious matter to the real deal. Very calm and slow, and wants to know about you. Wants to know you are a trustworthy person before they commit. So that's kind of tricky. Also, a human can't make you a shaman, or even necessarily a shamanic practitioner. They can teach you the rites. They can teach you how to talk to the spirits. They can teach you about nature. They can teach you about plants. They can teach you about animals. They can teach you stories and myths and folklore. Ultimately, what they do is they guide you into a position where you can make contact with the spirits, and then it's up to the spirits whether or not they pick you. So they can facilitate connection between, because the spirits didn't come and get you, they can facilitate you coming into the awareness of the spirits, but it's still then up to them to show the signs that, yes, we accept this person, yes, we're going to work with this person. And then the spirits become your teacher. So all a human can ever really do is just facilitate, like I'm kind of trying to do for you here. I can save you a lot of time and suffering listening to bad information and going around in circles. And I can make suggestions by which you can get in contact with the spirits, and then the things will go as they will go. And we'll see. So that's all really a human can do for you. They can't make you one of these things. No one can make you. You can't get, anyone who's giving you a certificate, anyone who says, attend my seminar and you will be a shaman. No. For one thing, again, it takes months, if not years, to do this. So it's a long, drawn-out thing. It's not a weekend thing. It's not a series of 5 or 6 weekend things. It's not like that. It's consistent practice over a protracted period of time, certainly months, probably a year or two, maybe more. Depends on you. The last way, there is a third way, because obviously there's not a lot of genuine shamanic teachers out there. They don't advertise. They're slow to accept people. A lot more people are interested than there are human teachers, the real deal. Mostly, if you look for a human teacher, you will find a fraud. Or you'll find a cosplay shaman, somebody who's kind of semi-delusional, either knowing they're delusional or genuinely delusional. So then what does that leave you? You can ask. And that's really what a human teacher will help you to do, is to figure out how to ask. Ask the spirits. Talk to them, call out to them, make a connection with one of them, and do it in such a way that the spirits show up. Just as they do in the crisis visions associated with severe illness and death, the spirits will show up. They might show up in dreams. They might show up in haunting phenomena. They may show up standing next to your bed saying, yeah, what do you want? They may, there's a number of different ways they can show up. But you can ask. You actually can ask. And that's one that a lot of people don't know. Most people know about human teachers and how hard they are to find. Most people know about the shamanic crisis and illness and how, that either happens or it doesn't happen. They don't necessarily know you can ask. And that this has precedent in traditional cultures where people wanted really bad to have interaction with the spirits, and they began a practice of asking. Again, a lot of times it takes months. Frequently it takes years of asking every day, once or twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, formally asking. Spirits come and interact with me. Spirits come and help me. Spirits grant me the knowledge and the path of spirituality, of the magic and the spiritual understanding of a shamanic person or whatever. May work, may not. You can go through the calling and nothing comes. Most people will go through the calling, and what they'll get is they'll get a little bump. Well, they'll get a little activity very quickly, very early on, within the first 3 to 6 months, and then they will get nothing for a long time, and then they'll start having the activity pick way up. Even if you've had a shamanic crisis, even if you have a human teacher, in many ways, it ultimately all does come back to asking anyhow. I mean, if you really want strong, common, familial spirit interaction, you're going to have to ask. You're going to have to do a calling for the spirits in this way. So really, it all kind of comes to asking. The thing is that if you had a crisis, the spirits will show up and they'll tell you how to do this. And if you find a human teacher, they'll tell you how to do this. But you can also just do it on your own. So that's what I want to kind of cover now, is how to get into this, and what it really is. Because there's a lot of misperception out there, a lot of fantasy shamans, a lot of fraud shamans, and a large number of cosplay shamans who see this as a tiny thing. They don't understand the seriousness of it. So one of the things I want to do, I want to talk a little bit about how you can get started, kind of books, the issue of books, because a lot of people, that's the next thing they ask, can you recommend a book? What's the first book? What's a good book? So I want to talk about that next. And then I want to kind of talk about, what is this landscape? What does this look like? What does the spirit world look like? And what does the magical world, which is, magic is a practical application of spiritual knowledge. or non-physical knowledge, or it's a practical application of observed phenomena in some reality, such that it creates a result. Usually, if we are going to use the term magic, we mean an uncanny result. So what does that look like? Because there are types of magic that have nothing to do with shamanism and are not compatible. And there's types of magic that are very much part of shamanism, and they may surprise you. If you understand what the folklore says, if you understand what the anthropology says about this sort of activity, you would be shocked. Certainly nobody in the West, including myself, lives up to what is possible, what is considered normal and expected amongst genuine shamans. So I wanted that will be a whole series of videos, because the subject, people overuse and abuse the word magic. They don't understand what it means. That is a humongous area of misunderstanding. It took me decades of study of hundreds of different approaches and a lot of folklore to start to unwind it all and say, wait a second, this doesn't go with this, and this might go with that, but it does not go with that, and so forth, until I started to say, oh, there's patterns here. A goes with A up here, and B goes with B over there, and they're not the same, and so forth and so on. So I will need to untangle that knot. It will save, not only will it save you decades of frustration and failure, it will also give you a view into what the history actually tells us is possible. Now, I'm going to cover my ass a little bit by saying, from a folklore perspective. As a Westerner, I'm not allowed to believe in this stuff. So, take me seriously when I say, oh, I don't believe in this stuff. Can I produce many of these things? No, not most of them, but some of them I can. And we'll talk about some of the stuff that's possible. What is truly possible, the path you're actually working on, and so on, is much more interesting and complicated and much more powerful than anything in the West, any book will tell you, or anything like that. So that's going to take a while to break down. That is definitely, 40 years of solid study. Probably eventually I'll do a whole course, like a lecture course, like a 24 lecture course on it. I'm just going to be able to give you a little tidbit right now. But hopefully it'll get you started, and eventually I'll try to focus on doing a, kind of a book on video, whatever ends up being. I mean, I don't know how many lectures it'll be. It'll be like, 20, 30, 40 hour and a half lectures, because it's really diverse and complicated. And I want to really go into the nitty gritty and try to find the source material for you so you can look at for yourself and so on. So that's all forthcoming. I'll at least give you something to be working with now, and we'll get into that after we talk about books and the confusing role that books play in the pursuit of spirituality. And then we'll see where we go from there.